my moves like my ABC.
I've been meaning to get back into the YouTube atheism thing for a while, and these 31 questions for atheists from Carm seems like a good way to get back into it. So here we go. How would you define atheism? I would simply define atheism as to be absent belief in God or gods. That's really it. Do you act according to what you believe, there is no God, or in what you don't believe, lack of belief in God? To me, that just betrays a lack of understanding of what atheism is. There are a tiny handful of what's called strong or positive or Gnostic atheists who assert there is no God. That's different from saying I don't believe in God. I don't believe in God, I don't believe in leprechauns, I don't believe in fairies. But I am open to having my mind changed on any of these things by evidence. So the whole question is just based on a misunderstanding of what atheism is. Atheism is simply the absence of belief in God, and that doesn't really guide your actions. That will have to come from something other than atheism. So it's just I don't believe in God. How I act, how I choose to act, and so on is not really informed by that. So it's not a good question. Do you think it is inconsistent for someone who lacks belief in God to work against God's existence by attempting to show that God doesn't exist? No. I don't believe in homeopathy either, and I will argue against that every opportunity that comes up. I'm not arguing against the validity of homeopathy because homeopathy has no validity. I am trying to demonstrate that it has no validity. Why? Because active belief in homeopathy does harm. People who will avoid conventional medicine to go to alternative medicine. The arguments behind it, the pseudoscience behind it, do damage in the field of real science. So it's not opposing homeopathy in this case per se, it's opposing the harm that homeopathy does, and in a similar way trying to debunk God belief and erode and show that it's not true is not arguing against God, who we would say we don't believe exists, but against the harm and the damage and the beliefs and issues that stem from belief in that deity. So no, it's not inconsistent at all, and the question frames it incorrectly. How sure are you that your atheism properly represents reality? Well, again, we're running into the fact that this is a poorly framed question that doesn't understand atheism, because atheism doesn't claim to represent reality. It's not a system of belief. It doesn't make any assertions whatsoever. Atheism in and of itself is just pointing at the God explanation and saying, no, that doesn't make any sense. It's untrue. Here's why. It's not making its own assertion. So I'm afraid this isn't really an answerable question, because the premise upon which it's based doesn't work. Sorry. How sure are you that your atheism is correct? Yet again, we have the same problem. It's not that atheism is correct, it's that the religious explanations are false. So again, that's a null question based on a misunderstanding of atheism. If I instead take the question as how confident are you that religious explanations are false, then very, very confident indeed. Unless you're talking about weak deism, which doesn't have any way to be tested. So I just, on a logical basis, there's no evidence for it, therefore, dismissed. Bring evidence. How would you define what truth is? I'll go with the Oxford English Dictionary on that one, in that truth is that which is true in accordance with fact and reality. So, confirmable reality. Why do you believe your atheism is a justifiable position to hold? Yet again, it's more that I believe that the religious position is completely unjustifiable. So, not believing in something is the default. You have to be persuaded into believing in something. So, with religious explanations lacking credibility or evidence or any reasonable arguments whatsoever, the only justifiable position on them is skepticism, and if you're not believing what's being asserted, then that's atheism. That's it. Are you a materialist or a physicalist, or what? Well, some definitions are going to be useful first. A materialist has two meanings, one of which is someone who's obsessed with physical comfort and the acquisition of things. No. The other definition is someone who believes that the universe is purely physical and there's nothing non-physical in it. Yes. Physicalist seems redundant since it just means the belief that there's nothing except the physical world, which is basically the same as materialist. So, and then to answer properly, yes, everything seems to reduce down to the physical. I'm open to it being proven otherwise, but as of yet, no one has demonstrated any even possibility for the existence of anything that's ultimately non-physical. Even information is rooted in the physical, whether it be inscribed in your neurons, scribbled down on a piece of paper. Even meaning has a final root in physical realities, so I see no reason to assert or believe that there is anything other than the physical. Feel free to try and prove me wrong. And as a quick note, this question moves well beyond atheism, which is simply, I don't believe in God. There are atheists that believe in ghosts and all kinds of other nonsense, so it's really unrelated. Do you affirm or deny that atheism is a worldview? Why or why not? The constant use of deny in these kind of conversations is a bit problematic, because to deny something presupposes that it exists in order to deny. So I don't appreciate the phrasing here as it front loads the question. But no, atheism is not a worldview. Atheism may be a part of a worldview, but atheism is simply the lack of belief in a God. So it might be an ingredient in a worldview, or it might be the result of a worldview. More often a result, in my experience. Skeptics are more likely to be atheists. Scientists are more likely to be atheists, and logical people are more likely to be atheists, and so it goes. So to make an analogy out of it, atheism isn't the cake, it's the flour, or the flavour. Not all atheists are antagonistic to Christianity, but for those of you who are, why the antagonism? If I answer purely from an atheistic point of view, it's simply that it's wrong, as in incorrect, not as in morally wrong. Yeah, it's not true. So why be antagonistic to it? Because it's not true. I basically covered this when I talked about homeopathy earlier as a form of analogy. Things that aren't true very often end up causing harm, and if we do want to solve or fix problems, we have to start from a basis of what's true. So I'm antagonistic towards Christianity as an atheist because it's not true. There are other reasons why I'm antagonistic towards Christianity, but those go beyond my atheism into other aspects of what I believe and why I believe it, so they're not really relevant here. If you were at one time a believer in the Christian God, what caused you to deny his existence? There's that Weasley little deny again. Was I a believer? I don't know, really. I don't think believe is the right word to come up with. I went to a Church of England primary school. My grandparents believed in God. My parents didn't really, but weren't very assertive about it while I was young. Most people around here are religious, but we didn't go to church. So it's kind of hard to tell, really. We had to say prayers at primary school. There were religious assemblies, there were hymns, all that kind of stuff, which is guaranteed to put you off religion, really, more than anything. But did I believe? I believed in the same sense that kids believe in Santa, and I stopped believing at about the same kind of point, really. So I don't think it was a considered or active or meaningful belief. And I don't deny God because there is no reason to believe that God exists. I stopped believing, even in that childish, simplistic way, about the same time I stopped believing in Father Christmas, which was around age 5 or 6, I think. Not that I let on because of presents. Do you believe the world would be better off without religion? Well, this goes beyond atheism again. There are atheists who believe that belief serves a purpose. Believe in belief. And that's Dennett's thing. So this is really, again, going beyond atheism into other things and other reasons that I believe. So I'll keep it short, but this is really not relevant to the overall thrust of the point of this. I think unquestionably the world would be better off without religion as a whole. But I don't think religion is the problem per se. I think religion is a symptom of the problem, and the problem is faith. People have a tendency to believe things for the wrong reasons, believe things because their ancestors did, things like that. The problem isn't religion per se, it's faith, and it's possible to have faith in an ideology. I mean, you look at the horrors of the Catholic Church when it was at the height of its power, and you look at the horrors of Stalinism when it was at the height of its power, and you look at the horrors of National Socialism at the height of its power, and they're pretty much the same, and they're all rooted in the same problem. Whether it's faith in the doctrine of the church, faith in Stalin's twisted brand of communism that was really a personality cult, or faith in the kind of nationalistic racial nonsense of the Nazis. And today we see the same problem. There's faith in the particularly radical misandrist wing of feminism. There's faith in some of the kind of supremacist or everyone else blaming ideologies found on campuses and in the worst parts of Tumblr and so on. So I think faith is the real problem, not religion. But would we have been better off without religion? Unquestionably, yes. We would have had other issues because people still have faith in other things that are terrible. But religion is its own special brand of horrible. Do you believe the world would be better off without Christianity? To put it in a parliamentary idiom, I refer the honourable member to the answer I gave some moments ago. Do you believe that faith in God is a mental disorder? Yes, I do. Now, this can be somewhat controversial, but religion meets the definition for delusional disorder if you ignore the special pleading. Because the definition for a delusional disorder is a persistent belief in something without and or against evidence. But they make special dispensation for culturally held and enforced beliefs, which is an obvious case of special pleading, because whether it's culturally inculcated or not, a belief that goes against or lacks evidence, it's still a delusion. It's just a societally sanctioned one. To put it another way, we don't suddenly redefine what healthy is just because there's a plague doing the rounds. That doesn't make any sense. See, a healthy body is one that's free of disease. A healthy mind is one that's free of delusion, whatever the source of that delusion is. We don't. If someone is raised in a family that consistently beats their children, and as a result a child grows up with PTSD, we don't ignore that. We don't say, oh, well, that's okay, that's just how that culture does it. So, the DSM tiptoes around the religious issue. And I'm speaking as someone with a mental disorder. I suffer from depression, so I think I'm on reasonably safe ground to say when someone else is cuckoo or not. I mean, obviously, to anyone with a lick of sense, the things that religion asserts, talking donkeys, talking snakes, hell, demons, angels, all the rest of it completely lacks evidence. So we can at least say that it's a belief held without evidence. And we can even say in some cases that it's a belief held against evidence. If you're a creationist, then you're believing that against the evidence that lies behind evolution and physics and all this other stuff that's all backed up with evidence. So you're not only believing without evidence, you're believing against evidence. And that is the very definition of a delusional disorder. So, yes, if you believe something that's patently and obviously untrue without evidence for it, with evidence against it, in some cases, then yes, that's a delusion and you're bonkers. And just because lots of people are bonkers doesn't mean that they're not bonkers. It means it's an epidemic. Our religion has some differences to other delusional disorders, but most of the time. There are some that have these as well, in that it's communicable. So it's not limited to a single person. That single person can spread it to others, though you do see this in other kinds of woo and in paranoid conspiracy theories and so on. They're infectious. So that's even more of a worry. It's not only bonkers, it's an infectious form of bonkers. So, short answer, yes, it's a mental disorder. No question. No question at all. Must God be known through the scientific method? The only way we can really assert to know anything is via the process of confirming it via evidence. So to the extent to which that overlaps with the scientific method, yes. If you answered yes to the previous question, then how do you avoid a category mistake by requiring material evidence for an immaterial God? Show me evidence of anything immaterial. It doesn't have to be God. Anything at all that isn't ultimately rooted in the physical. I mean, even the idea of God is rooted in the physical. It's a flaw in our brains. So, you know, this doesn't make sense, this question. Plus, religion asserts that God necessarily has a material effect. So even if this positive being was immaterial, it's supposedly done things in the material realm. If we stick to Christianity, for the sake of argument, it's done things like created visions, that's a material effect. Set fire to bushes, that's a material effect. Created the universe, that's a material effect. You know, inspired and guided people and manifested, these are all physical effects. People claim that, you know, God has come in and cured their diseases, that's a physical effect. So even if this positive God being was immaterial, it supposedly had physical effects, which could in themselves be examined, recorded, looked at, confirmed. And so in the same way that you can detect and confirm the existence of very hard to detect particles by virtue of their interaction with detectable particles, in the same way you could make a case for God by looking at the effect of said God on the material world, even if said God was supposedly immaterial. So either way, we're looking for physical evidence. So again, this is a null question, really. Do we have any purpose as human beings? Most of these questions from here on out, and many of the ones I've already answered, are really well away into the weeds, far away from the topic of atheism now. I'm going to stop bringing that up. I'm just going to answer the rest without bringing that up. But just as a note, a lot of this is going to be based on, you know, personal philosophies and viewpoints that really have nothing to do with atheism per se. So just a heads up. So do we have a purpose as human beings? It's irrelevant to this whole discussion, but I don't think we have any inherent purpose. You know, we have been built by evolution to reproduce ourselves, so that's as close to a designated purpose as humans get, and that, you know, after the secondary things as a result of our evolution, like passing on knowledge, you know, aiding each other, those sort of things. Those are as close as you get to purpose. Reproduction, biological altruism. That's really about it. But we have no inherent purpose. There's no inherent meaning. But we have intelligence. We have perception. We can choose a purpose for ourselves. We can choose a meaning for ourselves, and that's actually rather liberating, I find. If we do have a purpose, can you as an atheist please explain how that purpose is determined? I refer the honourable member to the answer I gave some moments ago. Where does morality come from? The short version is that we make it up. There are and have been all manner of moral systems, most of which are mutually incompatible in one way or another. Some people believe it's moral to throw gay people off buildings. Others don't. But others will condemn it, even if they don't go as far as throwing people off buildings. So there are competing moral systems, and they are all of human design. Slightly longer answer is that our morality is human constructed, but in the same way I just described, but in part influenced by our biological nature. We are gregarious apes. So the absolute most broad possible definition of morality you could get is, you know, things that perpetuate the species in the context of its evolution are things that we generally, across cultures, hold to be good. So we generally believe that altruism is good. We don't necessarily agree on the fine particulars of it. Most people would agree that charity is good. There are exceptions, but people might disagree over whether the best way to aid each other is through voluntary donations or whether it's through state intervention in taxation and so on. But generally we all agree that there is some kind of greater good, with the exception of a handful of anarcho-capitalists, of course. So it's the interaction between these things, our natural tendencies, our societal programming, and the context and conditions in which we find ourselves create a moment-by-moment, step-by-step moral system. Are there moral absolutes? No. Moral systems are constructed, and as such they can be manipulated in order to excuse or even promote even the most horrible behaviours that we would otherwise think are unacceptable. There's a current push in a certain wing of the media to try and present paedophilia as being somehow acceptable, but pederasty was acceptable, historically, going way back. Kids would get married very, very young. Look at the case of Muhammad and Aisha, for example, or royalty in Europe in the Dark Ages. Kids were getting married as young as 6, 7, 8, 9, and this was seen as normal. The Greeks would take young boy lovers, and this wasn't seen as a problem whatsoever. Murder has been repeatedly justified by moral systems down the years. Just read the Bible and you'll see religiously excused genocide, which you would think would be some sort of, if something was going to be a universally bad thing, you would think it would be either raping children or committing wholesale mass slaughter to wipe out a particular people. And both of these things are excused and justified by religions that are active today. So, no. There are no moral absolutes, because morality is a construct. And that's just how it is. Can we create better constructs? Can we examine morality from a rational, skeptical point of view and maybe come up with something that works towards the betterment of humanity? Personally, I put a lot of stock in a sort of combination of Epicureanism and utilitarianism as a way to find what might be a better moral system. And I support Sam Harris's work in examining moral systems in this way, and his search for a secular, scientifically backed moral system. I think that's useful work. Even if it comes up with no results, I think it's useful work. If there are moral absolutes, could you list a few of them? I'll refer the honourable member to the answer I gave some moments ago. Do you believe there's such a thing as evil? If so, well, what is it? There are a great many things that can be considered evil, but they're only considered evil within the context of the moral systems, which, as we've discussed previously, are arbitrary, or largely arbitrary. So the things I would regard as evil are not the same things that someone else would regard as evil. The things that one religion regards as evil are not the same as things in another religion. Even within the same religion, different wings, different sects will believe that different things are evil. So there's, evil is a conditional term depending upon the moral context that is making the judgment. So I would try to avoid that term, I think, because of that flaw. It's essentially meaningless. You have to define the context first. If I personally was to define something as evil, it would be things which are detrimental to people's health and well-being as a whole. So I would regard religion, or more accurately faith, as being possibly one of the greatest evils in history. If you believe that the God of the Old Testament is morally bad, by what standard do you judge that he is bad? Well, I've given my reasons, because I regard it as being detrimental and untrue. So that's a bit of a double whammy there. But you can judge the God of the Old Testament by its own standards, and it still comes out as evil. It's murderous, wrathful, it's a liar. There's even judging by its own standards, it's a hideously evil God. So, it fails by numerous moral standards. But I'm judging by my own personal moral standard, which I strive to make as objective as possible. In that this being this supposed being is detrimental to the well-being, life, limb, and happiness of people, of human beings, and therefore that's why I personally see it as a moral bad, whether or not it exists. If it turned out that the God described in the Bible was true, I think it would be every human's moral duty to oppose it on ethical grounds. What would it take for you to believe in God? Compelling evidence. What would constitute sufficient evidence for God's existence? I can't really answer this because it depends on the God being asserted, and even within religions there are many different God definitions that are being asserted. So it depends. It sounds like a cop-out, but if you're trying to assert that a creationist God exists, then you would need to provide evidence that not only that God exists, but it's sufficient to overturn all the evidence for biological evolution. So, I can't answer that. I need to know what God you're asserting exists before I can answer. I'm not going to assume what the questioner means. That would be rude. So, if you want to give me a God definition that you're trying to assert, then maybe I can give you some examples. But until then, I can't. Must this evidence be rationally based, archaeological, testable in a lab, etc., or what? Yes, that's the nature of evidence. Do you think that a society run by Christians or atheists would be safer? Why? Well, there's no guarantees, and I'm sure people would trot out atheistic societies such as North Korea or Stalinist Russia or China or somewhere as examples that aren't necessarily particularly safe, depending on your point of view of what safety is. But I don't think these are really examples of atheistic societies per se, because there's so much else going on. There's that ideological faith that I was talking about earlier. Now, studies have shown that organically atheist societies, that is, societies which have become secular and atheistic on their own without it being imposed, are safer, do tend to have better social indicators, less poverty and so on. And moving to a different tack, you'll find that religion makes no appreciable difference to human criminality, while people who are atheists tend to be much less likely to be criminal, and so on. There are other reasons for this. It's not purely down to what people believe and don't believe. You'll find that high religiosity tends to coincide with poverty, and which is a much bigger indicator of likelihood to resort to criminality and so on. So it's none of this is cut and dried. But given the existing tendencies, the available evidence, I would tend to think that an organically atheist society would tend to be safer. Why? Because it tends to be full of rational actors. And it's just not rational to destroy your own society, worsen your own conditions, put yourself at risk to that degree, and so on. But then currently atheism is the preserve of people who tend to be more intelligent, more educated, and so on. That's not to be arrogant, that's just what the stats tend to show. So if we extended atheism over the whole of society, would it make any difference to these behaviours? It's just not believing in God. So it's a very hard question to answer with any kind of certainty. But given the available evidence, as lackluster as it is, I still think that yes, because religion tends to provide excuses for bad behaviour or forgiveness for bad behaviour in a way that secular moral systems do not. And as such, I think they tend to lead to healthier societies, as we see in Scandinavia and Nordic countries, which tend to be very, very atheistic, but also to score very, very highly on human development indices and so on. So, given the available evidence, again, to reiterate, I do believe that an atheistic society, an organically atheist society, would be safer. Do you believe in free will? Free will being the ability to make choices without coercion. I think this is an unanswered question. My personal feeling, and I hate to go on feelings, is that the way I experience the world is as though I had free will. So I would tend towards the existence of free will. I feel like my experience is that I am making choices. I am weighing my decisions based on evidence. But then, is evidence coercion? you can get lost in this kind of stuff. So in general, yeah, I would tend on free will, but I think that our ability to make choices exists within a channel, so there are limited degrees of choice that we can make. So limited free will, if you will. If you believe in free will, do you see any problem with defending the idea that the physical brain, which is limited and subject to neurochemical laws of the brain, can still produce free will choices? I don't see a problem here. I mean, the physical nature and makeup of the brain might be a limiter, that channel I was talking about, but the brain structure itself can change as a result of our choices and decisions. So yeah, there's that too. And the brain is so utterly complex that chaos theory comes in. You know, one stimulus won't necessarily produce the same reaction 2 times in a row. And there are subtleties and differences, and so no, the brain being physical, chemical, electrochemical doesn't make any difference to the capacity for free will, in my opinion, based on the evidence. If you affirm evolution and that the universe will continue to expand forever, then do you think it is probable that given enough time, brains could evolve to the point of exceeding mere physical limitations and become free of the physical and temporal, and thereby become deity and not restricted by space and time? If not, why not? No, because everything is ultimately physical, including the universe itself. If you answer the previous question in the affirmative, then aren't you saying it's probable that some sort of God exists? No, because such a being still wouldn't be a god. It would have had to have originated within a physical universe and would have had to evolve. So it would create a god. Certainly, it wouldn't be a god in any sense. It would just be an evolved being. Even this hypothetical, which I don't think can exist. So where does that leave us? Could very, very advanced beings exist? Yes, but those are not gods in the sense that people are trying to assert here. Could we potentially escape the bounds of the temporal? Not in any meaningful way, so far as we can tell at present, in that you might be able to travel to the past, but it wouldn't be our past, it would be an alternative past. So you wouldn't be affecting our universe. That's how people speculate you might get around temporal paradoxes and so on, if you could travel in time. Beyond the physical, no, because everything is ultimately physical, so far as we can tell. There's no evidence of anything beyond the physical, nothing metaphysical. You know, everything eventually boils down to something physical, originating in something physical. There doesn't appear to be any way around that. So, with everything we know at the moment, we may learn something different in the future. Such things don't appear to exist and don't appear to be able to exist, and would not be gods in the way that religions are asserting.